Welcome to Your Company is Ready for FP&A, What You Need to Know, brought to you by the Controllers Council. My name is Neil Brown, Executive Director of the Controllers Council, and before I introduce our expert panelists and our partner sponsor, let me share some brief housekeeping items. We'll have Q&A at the end of the presentation, so please use your GoToWebinar control panel to ask our experts questions. Next, this webinar is CPE eligible. We'll have 4 polling questions. So again, use your GoToWebinar control panel to answer each poll. And if not seeking CPE, just to benchmark your peers. Please do allow 5 days for CPE certificates. Also regarding CPE, you'll receive a brief survey directly after the broadcast, so please complete. And finally, you'll receive a link to this webcast via email in the next 24 hours, so no need for notes or screenshots. So with that, I'm happy to introduce our sponsor, Bill, NYSE-BILL, is a leading financial operations platform for small and mid-sized businesses. As a champion of SMBs, Bill automates the future of finance so businesses can thrive. Bill's integrated platform helps businesses to move more efficiently to control payables, receivables, spend and expense management. Hundreds of thousands of businesses rely on Bill's proprietary member network of millions to pay or get paid faster. Headquartered in San Jose, California, Bill is a trusted partner of leading U.S. financial institutions, accounting firms, and accounting software providers. For more information, visit bill.com. With that, I'd like to introduce our today's panelists. Ken Fick is President and CEO of FP&A Experts that provides FP&A, budgeting, and related services with more than 20 years experience in corporate finance and consulting. Ken is a frequent contributor to media outlets on a variety of corporate finance and accounting topics. And Joe Flesher is webinar content manager for Bill with more than 16 years experience, including CFO.com and Argyle. Gentlemen, welcome, and Joe, please take it away.
Well, thank you so much for that warm introduction. Thrilled to join our audience, and in particular, talking about a top-of-mind topic, financial planning and analysis. During our webinar today, Ken and I will consider what financial planning and analysis, or FP&A, is and where FP&A fits within finance. We'll also consider how to recognize when a company, especially a growing company, needs to establish as well as sustain the discipline of FP&A to map out growth long-term, and we'll also consider what companies must have in place organizationally and technologically to put financial planning and analysis into practice. And often organizational requirements and technological requirements intersect. We'll talk about that intersection as well. What I'd like to do is launch into our first question, which is essential, and that is, Ken, how would you define financial planning and analysis, given your career, given your experience, and where would you say FP&A fits within the finance function?
Well, the simplest answer, Joe, is accountants record the historical results as accurate as possible, so like a controller, and then FP&A takes that information and analyzes it and explains the historical performance, which is the A in FP&A. Then they take that information and forecast the future period results using the insights learned from all the analysis in the A I just talked about. That's the simplest form. The more precisely or accurate form is FP&A tends to be the jack of all trades and the master of most others. We answer strategic questions. We do forecast the future. We ensure a timely accounting close. We're working hand in hand. We should be working hand in hand with the controller. A lot of times, we're doing a variance analysis as well too to budget. You're going to catch expenses or missed items that you're going to work with the controller to correct. But then we're also taking that, preparing board packages and external reporting that will go to investors. We could prep the executive team, work on divestitures, analyze product lines, perform due diligence and acquisitions, and of course, at the end of the day, manage the budget, right? Because someone's got to manage the budget. So in summary, the FP&A is really future-focused arm of finance that connects the strategic goals of the company to the outcomes through FP&A's insights. And it's typically found under the CFO function, although I've seen it report directly to the CEO as well too. It depends. It's more of a strategic advisor type of role when they're doing a lot more pragmatic acquisitions, but typically it'd be under the CFO.
Thank you very much, Ken. And actually, I just want to follow up on a point that you made. Would you say that in most organizations you've either worked for or with, the FP&A function is, I mean, we've already indicated this, but perhaps I'll phrase the question in one of two ways. So one, in your experience, have you found it effective to place, despite the name, would you say it is most effective to place the FP&A function under the auspices of the highest level of financial management, financial oversight, number one? Number two, what have you observed or heard, let's say, about organizations that place FP&A adjacent, but not necessarily adjacent to, but not necessarily under the finance function?
So I guess in two ways. So the one directly under it makes the most sense. Then the question really is, do you want a distributed FP&A function or centralized? So do you want to take the FP&A function and place it within the business units, or do you want to have it centralized and more of a client relationship, like a professional services firm? So that's under the CFO. When I've seen it more of a direct reporting to senior manager, it's typically an alternative structure. It could be a government organization or a nonprofit or some other organization that requires a great deal of analysis and data to review and provide immediate or more direct feedback to leadership to drive change. So I'd say like 95% of the time it's going to be on the CFO and report directly to that senior finance person. And then the other 5%, it just depends.
All right. It's great to hear your perspective, especially about how organizations establish FP&A, even if FP&A is not necessarily under the direct responsibility or direct auspices of finance. I think with that in mind, we're ready to pose our first of 4 polling questions. I'll turn the floor back to Neil.
All right, thank you. So is there a role for FP&A within your company's finance team? So let me launch this poll. And please take a few moments to answer, and we'll go from there.
We want to give attendees enough time to respond to our first of 4 polling questions, and we will reveal your responses briefly. We may even have some time to talk about your responses, which we'll reveal, by the way, in aggregate. And again, this is the first of 4 polling questions.
Good point. And if you're not going for CPE, still answer it, because you can do some serious benchmarking as well. And we're getting close to 100% vote here. So if you haven't voted, please do so right away. And let's share results. Gentlemen, any comments?
Well, this is Joe. I'm going to start first. So clearly, we can see that a slim majority have said yes, but a slim one. Then we have an interesting split. I'd like to turn it back to you, Ken, before we pose our next question. Before I pose my next question to you, Ken, I'd love to hear your comments about this interesting split.
Well, I think it comes down to complexity of the organization and size. So typically, the larger an organization, the need or desire to have an FP&A function. And the smaller the organization, the less need and desire that FP&A, there would need to be an FP&A. If those ones in the middle, no, but we intend to establish one, they're probably in the mindset of growth at this point, and are looking to go beyond what they've currently done historically. and track those metrics going forward. So I think of that. That's why we're seeing this. It's not 100%. And everyone that said no, probably there might be family-run businesses or a single owner businesses. And I worked with one company, and his goal was to make as much money every year as possible. Well, okay, you don't really need an FP&A function for that necessarily. So, and they were a $100 million company. So it depends on the needs of the company, like leadership team, and what's going on, the complexity of it overall.
That's a really great point, Ken. And I want to pose my next question to you. But in the meantime, thank attendees for sharing your responses to the first of 4 polling questions. Moving on to the next question, you've talked about complexity. Now, there is often an assumption that as a company, and it's correct, that as a company evolves, it becomes more complex. So it doesn't just grow in size, it grows in, let's say, either maturity and or complexity. And it is in this context I want to pose this question. Ken, what would you say are the clearest indications a company ought to introduce FP&A within the finance function?
There's no one clear indicator, but I will give you several. It's really the straw that broke the camel's back type of situation. The biggest one is what I just mentioned, is goals. And that's with an S, not a single one. If the goal is to make as much money every year as much as possible, that's one goal. Well, that's an easier, a single person can manage and get everybody on the same page. It's very short-sighted because you're not looking to increase enterprise value and a long-term growth, but it's there and it's easily communicated. When a company begins to or gets, let's say, bought by private equity or so on, they're going to have different types of goals, not only growth, but also profitability. It could be acquisitions. It could be employee turnover. These are attrition. These are all other metrics that come into place to have goals and expectations. And the leadership is going to be held to those expectations. Just like a publicly traded company, right? They give the street guidance, and they're held to that guidance. And typically, they get punished if they missed it, and rewarded despite the stock price going up if they hit it. That being said, there are other indicators a company would have, or the attributes that a company would have, where they would start to look about having an FP&A. One is rapid growth. High growth companies need a robust forecast to understand the performance trajectories and the capital requirements. And FP&A provides that. They could be having frequent budget or forecast variances, and that it can be a problem because it's a resource allocation. So you're trying to match as closely as possible from the resource you have, or let's say the cost of goods, and selling them. Because the lower you can get, lower inventory you can get, and so on, the more money you can make. So if you're getting constant variances, you might be having to carry more inventory, more staff, more whatever, which tends to be a reason to bring in somebody to run analysis as to why, what's going on. Data overload, see it all the time. Companies accumulate more data than they know what to do with, and they need someone to understand, what does it mean? Why am I doing this? How is this? What actions do I take to improve it? Outdated processes. A lot of times when I've walked into a finance transformation, there's a reliance on slow and manual processes. This organization I'm working with right now, it's a state housing department basically, and they're still using paper. I don't know anyone using paper. And then they PDF it into a repository afterwards. So that's a need for FP&A, and that's why I'm there working with that. They can also have poor visibility. So the ownership or leadership, the company's gotten too complex, and they don't know what's happening. It's too big, and they don't know what's happening throughout it. A lot of times bringing in FP&A for reporting, will be it. And probably the other couple are changing market. So shifting competitive or economic factors that all of a sudden makes the business's livelihood, their results more compelling, more pertinent for whatever happened. And a lot of times, when a competitor moves into an area, you saw a lot of that when Walmart was young and building out, right? A small town America didn't want Walmart because they steal their customers. And we had to go through that as a nation, right? Now it's completely changed. Everyone shops at Amazon. Walmart is still doing well, but that's not uncommon. When a new leadership happens, so there's a change in the CEO or some type of transaction, some change in ownership, they want to bring somebody in to help them understand the strategic growth and understand how to achieve those things, or make strategic choices such as M&A, or such as acquiring key personnel in sales or marketing or whatever. So these are all things that could lead to bringing in an FP&A resource, whether it be a consultant or internal hire, but it's typically never going to be one. It's going to be multiple things. And they're really, I'm going to go back to what I said before. Even if you have all of those things, you have rapid growth, market changes, you have poor visibility, unless you have a goal, unless you have a series of goals, you're probably not going to see the need to bring in FP&A because you basically, you believe, right or wrongly, that you have the capability to handle the situation.
Thank you, Ken. Now, before we transition to our second polling question, I do want to follow up on a point that you made regarding visibility, and one often links visibility and control. Now, these bullets that we're looking at now, as well as previous bullets, many of them reflect conditions or circumstances beyond a company's control. But visibility, and I'm not talking about, let's say, visibility into how the markets will behave or how financial markets will behave in the future. I'm talking about visibility. You talked about paper, reliance on paper, and there is definitely a link or a correlation between, let's say, reliance on paper, reliance on manual processes, and visibility, which in turn affects control or undermines control. So I want to give you the opportunity to talk about that briefly, and then we'll pose our second of 4 polling questions.
Sure. So visibility is into the drivers of performance. So instead of just looking at revenue as revenue, it's going to be some makeup of price and quantity, and typically price, quantity, and mix. So you're going to have those types of things in it. Why are we missing expectations or change from last year? Those drivers of, let's say, on the most simplest term, those drivers of revenue performance is going to have greater visibility. And a lot of times, if you're working with a bookkeeper, they'll give you financial statements, and you'll have monthly financial statements even as a trend. You see a number, but taking it the next step and say, okay, well, that's a number, but my goal or our goal as a company is to achieve a certain degree of profitability. That means I need so much in gross margin. That means I need this many people to deliver these services. That's the visibility they're looking to find. And a great deal of time I've brought in to build basically what I call the CFO book. And it's a series of metrics customized to the company that they get every month, typically by the 15th business day, depending on what their close are, and look at the trends and provide a storytelling insight, the visibility, transparency in the organization to make changes that they deem necessary to meet their goals. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I know we're going to talk about storytelling, but even at the operational level, just making sure that executives, as well as those who work for executives, have visibility into the numbers. That is something that is essential at an operational level to support strategy. And we're going to talk about that very soon. Before we do, though, let's pose now our second of 4 polling questions. Neil, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thank you. And let us launch this poll. The